Well, hello everybody, and I would like to welcome you to this seventh of 8 weekly presentations by renowned climate scientist Dr. Tom English in his Environmental Education series. And today we're going to be discussing the Pope, the Patriarch, and the Rabbi and their impact on the climate crisis. My name is Dave Rice, and I'll be your host for this event. Dr. English has accomplished many things in his rich and varied career, with much of it having to do with improving our environment. Of his many notable accomplishments, several of them are. One, he was the author of the California Clean Air Act in the late 80s, which was largely responsible for getting rid of all the smog we suffered from back then. He played a significant role in the early shutdown of the San Onofre nuclear plant in 2012 due to unreported radiation leaks, and is currently serving on the Nuclear Task Force created by Congressman Mike Levin, as is yours truly. He's also met and collaborated with dignitaries around the world and has earned a Congressional Medal of Honor on behalf of the Patriarch Bartholomew for their work on climate. Tom has an unusual ability to communicate difficult concepts in very easy to understand ways. He has a huge passion for educating others on our current climate crisis and the existential threats that it's bringing to us and to our children's generations. We all need to be aware of what can be done to counter this. So the goal of this series is to help us all more clearly understand the main issues behind climate change and what can be done about it, so we can have better discussions with family and friends and become more involved in helping make a difference. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Tom English.
Well, thanks very much, Dave. So welcome to today's talk on the Pope, the Patriarch, and the Rabbi. This is a talk that I'm having a lot of fun with. It's basically a look at how organizations like religious organizations can actually do some things that are useful in terms of climate change. We're going to be looking at the religious organizations from basically 3 levels, sort of a local level, that's the Rabbi. And then we're going to go to an intermediate level, that would be the Patriarch. And then to the top of the heap level, which would be the Pope. So here's the flow today. We're going to have an introduction describing some of the background. Then we're going to talk about the Rabbi and his friends. In particular, we're going to talk about an organization that was that this Rabbi helped create, and he's currently the co-director of it. Then we'll get to the Patriarch and his activities and organization and what he's doing. And we'll get to why Al Gore called him the Green Patriarch, which is kind of interesting. Then finally, the Pope. We'll discuss a lot of interaction between the Patriarch and the Pope, and we'll spend some time on an interesting organization within the Pope's organization called the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. Most of you probably haven't heard much about that, so I think you'll find that it's interesting. And then we'll get on with some conclusions. So that's the flow for today, so welcome aboard. First, we'll get through the introduction here. There's a sort of a methodology that I've been using during these 7 presentations that we've had so far. It really is sort of a takeoff of Arnold Toynbee's A Study of History. This is, if you want to get into history in terms of making it fascinating for you, I recommend this book here by Toynbee. It's just marvelous. He did a great job, and he got me rehooked on history. He uses a methodology that I call SPEAR. There's a guy with a spear in his hand here. And a basic idea is these letters stand for something. SPEAR stands for to understand a society or culture, you have to understand their scientific perspective. You also have to understand their political perspective. You have to understand their economic perspective. And you should understand their artistic perspective. And we've done these things, except for the artistic one. We haven't done much on that during the previous talks. And today we're going to get to a new perspective. This is the religious perspective. And we're going to focus on the religious perspective during today's talk. So basically a little bit of background theology, not much, but a little bit here. Basically the idea is that God intends us that we live in harmony with ourselves, first of all. It's a big deal. If you don't live in harmony with yourselves, it's hard for you to do very much. So you have to get used to yourself and get to like yourself. And God would like us to get along with others, get along with nature, and also get along with God. So this is sort of the basic recipe for most of the religions that I'm aware of. So we'll follow that kind of scheme today. There's a little bit about that in the book Laudato Si that I mentioned to you earlier around page 66. If you want to get some more detail about how to do some of this harmony, peace and harmony stuff, there's a book that's really good by a good friend of mine, Leo Rock. Leo was my advisor, my so-called spiritual advisor for about 4 years. He was the leading clinical psychologist of the Jesuits worldwide. And he was my mentor for, like I said, about 4 years. The book is called Making Friends with Yourself. And basically, there's a chapter in there called Making Friends with Yourself. There's also a chapter in there about making friends with others. So I think that and making friends with nature, those are some of the big pieces. So if you want a little bit of help in this idea, go to Leo's book. You can get it on Amazon.com. Well, this business of climate change, we've been spending a lot of time on that. The chief of the U.S. Pacific Forces, Admiral Sam Locklear, said that climate is his biggest worry. They're worried about naval ports being flooded out. They're worried about islands disappearing. They're worried about migration all over the planet. This climate change is a giant so-called threat multiplier. I heard Admiral Locklear give this kind of message during his speech at Scripps Institution of Oceanography a few years ago. He's also a good friend of a person I mentioned earlier, Admiral Len Herring. This is the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. He's basically simulating a problem that many of the island countries are having, that as the sea level rises, it gets harder and harder for the people in the islands to live there. The islands can be sunk, for one thing, but a more subtle thing than that happens too. As the islands rise, the salt water intrudes into the fresh water system of the nation, which really makes it a threat for them to be able to live there. So it's a big, big problem. The idea of climate change, we often think of it as maybe sort of a new thing. It's been around for a long time. There have been various Republican EPA chiefs who have said it's time to act on global warming. The first EPA chief was Bill Ruckelshaus. I got to serve in EPA during his time. He was a very well thought of guy. He was big on climate change. Lee Thompson served under the Reagan administration. Bill Riley, who I knew really well, he served under the Elder Bush administration. Interesting side story on him. I was working with Silicon Valley manufacturing group, about 125 companies in Silicon Valley, and we were leading the world in the reduction of toxic wastes. So Riley wanted to come to EPA, or to come to visit us in Silicon Valley, so to tell us what a good job we were doing. So he came, and I invited about 500 of my closest personal friends to lunch with Bill Riley. So we had a nice luncheon and a good discussion. So this is not a new idea. This is something that many, many Republican EPA chiefs have been pushing for a long time. We talked earlier about the sixth extinction. This is a comment by Bill Gates about it. He basically says there have been 5 extinction events in Earth history. And this Elizabeth Colbert makes a compelling case that the human activity is leading to the 6th. Not only is it leading to this extinction, but the numbers that many people look at, including some of the organizations that we'll talk about today, including the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and the National Academy of Sciences, are basically saying that this extinction could occur during this century. So this could be a disaster for not just our nation, but for our entire culture. Some analysis indicate that it could cause the extinction of humanity. So it's a big deal. We want to get together and stop this thing. There's a saying from the Old Testament by a prophet by the name of Hosea, talking about sin and environmental degradation. Sin in this sense is a little different than maybe how you think of it normally. It's a Hebrew archery term, basically saying missing the mark. So if there is some sort of plan and you're not functioning according to that plan, you're you're missing the mark. You're you're off target. So that's what they mean by sin. So Hosea says that there is no faithfulness, no love, no acknowledgement of God in the land. There is only cursing, lying, and murder, stealing, and adultery. They break all bounds, and bloodshed follows bloodshed. So this is like today's headlines in the San Diego Union Tribune. These are the kind of problems we have. These are moral problems, ethical problems, and we have lots of them. The interesting thing about this prophet Hosea is he links these moral and ethical problems to environmental degradation. What he says is because of this, the land mourns, and all who live in it waste away. The beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the fish of the sea are dying. So this was obvious to someone, let's say 3-4 centuries before Christ's time. So this is not a new idea, but the idea is the idea that we talked about in the first lecture, that the phenomena of the environmental devastation, it used to be just local, and then with time it got to be maybe citywide, and then regional wide, and finally countrywide. And now the problems that we're seeing are global. So there's no way to hide anymore. We basically have to solve these problems. So I think I used this one before. It's a cartoon from the San Diego Union Tribune. It shows Atlas holding the world on his shoulders, which is a stock kind of thing for Atlas. And he's talking to, I guess this is the god Zeus here. And he says to him, it's a repo from the humans. They couldn't handle the maintenance. So let's hope we can really handle the maintenance on this planet, because we have no planet B. Scientific American says that we conquered the planet. Our species, we yielded the ultimate weapon. Now, we normally think of like weapons in terms of might and things like that. He's saying that the ultimate weapon that we yielded to get the position of the #1 species on the planet is cooperation. So cooperation went a long way to get us to the position where we are the biggest biological and the biggest geological force on the planet today. Let's hope that our faith can help us to decide what we should do in this new leadership position. I love the Lord of the Rings. I think it's really a fascinating thing. Here's a discussion with Frodo and Gandalf. Frodo opens with, "I wish it need not have happened in my time." Gandalf says, "So do I, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us." So that's our situation. We're in a situation, we may not like the situation, we didn't certainly cause the situation, but it's a situation we're in, and we only have a limited amount of time. Many people are arguing that we have to get our act together and get things going in a big way in the next 10 or so years, or else we will have irreversible phenomena occur, which will essentially make it harder and harder, maybe impossible, for us to really solve the problem. So this is the time to get busy. So get busy talking to your friends, your neighbors, whatever, even some of those that you don't think are very friendly to you, and try to win them over. This is the Chinese symbol for crisis. The top symbol is one symbol. It's pronounced something like, forgive my Chinese, something like whoa. So the idea is like a horse is going to run off a cliff. So whoa, horsey, whoa. The bottom symbol is something like the character G. So it's like G wins. So this is sort of a combination of danger, woe, and G, opportunity. So that's the Chinese idea of crisis, danger, and opportunity. So I'm a believer in this philosophy. I think we have a very bad danger in front of us, but we also have great opportunities in front of us. So I think we have to pick and choose. So in this talk, we'll see how the religious organizations can maybe be helpful to us in the way we pick and choose. Maybe we can learn a few things from the way they picked and choose, and hopefully do better ourselves. So that's the intro. The rabbis and a friend. We'll talk about one guy, a rabbi, and a bunch of his friends in an organization that he founded, and some of the things that they've done. This rabbi is named Rabbi Warren Stone. He's from the Temple Emmanuel in Kensington, Maryland. Well, this is a small community near Washington, D.C. And the organization that I'm going to talk a lot about for Rabbi Warren here is the co-chair of the National Religious Coalition on Creation Care. So I'm a member of that organization, member of the board, and have been working with them for many years. Warren is also the founding chair of the Central Conference of the American Rabbis Committee on the Environment. This is a picture of Warren here. And basically this is him blowing a thing called a shofar. It's a sort of a ram's horn. He's taking part in a United Nations conference, COP15 in Copenhagen. And this conference is sort of a predecessor to the main conference that's been impacting climate change, which is COP21, which took place in Paris. So this shofar, this horn that he's blowing it at these windmills here. There's about 12.5 windmills in the water off of Copenhagen. It's mainly used on main Jewish feasts like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's used to mark the end of the fast at Yom Kippur and during the prayers of Rosh Hashanah. Warren used it as a climate change wake-up, kind of in the words of the famous Jewish rabbi Maimonides, sleepers, wake up from your slumber, examine your ways and repent, and remember your Creator. So that's a very beautiful picture of him doing this wake-up call. This is some symbolism for this group called the National Religious Coalition on Creation Care. The basic idea here is that the organization is trying to serve all faiths. For example, this would be the Christian faith, this would be the Jewish faith, etc. So what they do is they've been putting on various organizations. For example, this is a meeting here at the United States National Cathedral. This is the place where presidents, where they bury presidents, essentially. A beautiful big building. It holds several thousand people. This is some dignitaries here. This is a guy who is who's received an award from this National Religious Coalition on Creation Care. His name is Wendell Berry. He's also the person who wrote a book which has an interesting title. The title is Home Economics. He's using it broader than the U.S. curriculum of home economics in the schools. He's using it as something as basically home being our earth. And he was very influential in getting Bill McKibben, the founder of the 350.org organization, to basically take up his current positions. We had a meeting at the National Cathedral with several thousand people attending the talks. We also had a meeting the next day at it's a Greek Orthodox cathedral. I guess it would be like their national cathedral, which is about a couple football fields away from the regular National Cathedral. And we had a conference there, a day-long conference called Scientific, Religious, and Cultural Implications of Global Warming. So one of the major functions that the religious community can do is one of education. They have a lot of people in those pews on Saturdays and Sundays. So if they can influence those people in terms of helping out on the major issues like climate change, they can make a giant difference. At this conference here, we had, for example, Bill McKibben, the head of IBM, or the head of 350.org. We had a Reverend John Kasavage, representing the Patriarch Bartholomew. He is his speech writer and theologian. We had a general, and we had Jim Hansen, probably the most famous climate change scientist in the world. So we had a very nice program, and lots of people came to attend. One of the things we've done with this group called the National Religious Coalition on Creation Care is put together a book called Witness for the Earth, written by me and Fred Kruger, who probably is on this call. Basically, one of the sections of the book deal with the religious statements from a variety of religious organizations, including the Catholics, the rabbis, the evangelicals, the National Council of Churches, the Baptists, the Presbyterians. There's an interesting one here, the Quakers. The head Quaker was attending our meeting there, and I asked him if he had a policy on climate change, and he said, no, we don't have a policy. I says, well, that's too bad, because I wanted to take your policy and put it in this book. And he said, well, you know, we're meeting in Philadelphia in a couple of weeks. We could get you a policy if you like. And so he did. He got the policy and we stuck it in the book. So these are some of the people who have worked with the Rabbi Warren over the years in the National Coalition for Creation Care. This guy is Carlos Agnesi. He's from Mexico. He's showing a picture of his kids and how important his kids are to him. Interesting story with him. I first met him when I was sitting in the lobby of the Willard Hotel, and I was feeling glum because we were having a bad time getting some meetings with the White House. And so Carlos comes in and says, hello, I'm Carlos. And he starts talking to me and he says, you seem to be sort of glum. And I said, I am having trouble getting meetings with the White House. So he says, well, I can make a call and see if I could help you. So we thought, well, what the heck? So he calls up and he gets the secretary on the phone. He said, this is Carlos. I'd like to speak to Andy Card. Andy Card is the chief of staff for George Bush. So the lady says, well, Mr. Card is a very busy person. What do you want to call about? He says, oh, he just asked me to call him next time I was in Washington, so I thought I'd give him a call. He says, could you take a message? So she said, sure. So just tell him that Carlos called and have him give me a call. So she says, Carlos who? He says, oh, he knows who I am. No need for that. What's your phone number? Oh, he has my phone number. So I'm thinking, oh, this isn't going to go anywhere. This is terrible. So he hangs up. And about 3 minutes later, his phone rings, and it's Andy Card, the chief of staff of George Bush, calling him and inviting him over. So then the White House was wide open to us, and there was no problem getting anything out of them. Carlos was president of Lloyd's of Mexico, the country's largest commercial insurance company. He created an activity that's kind of interesting. He basically wanted to restore the forest of northern Mexico, and he got the World Bank to put up $91 million to do that. And some of the restoration was done by guys wearing black shirts who turned out to be from the Army of Mexico. It turns out that they adopted forest restoration as a national security issue. So he planted over 530 million trees and created jobs for a large number of people, about 7 million people in the poor rural communities. So he was a big hero. And next is Lisa Jackson. Lisa Jackson was the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. And she's receiving an award from, this guy is a bishop of Maryland. And he's called the Green Bishop. And he's called that because he's so active in environmental activities. This is an imam here. This is a Protestant minister here. So we tried to have a wide variety of different religions involved in our activities. This is taking place in the Willard Hotel, which is a block or so away from the White House. Lisa Jackson led EPA's effort to enforce the Clean Water Act for mountaintop mining. So those mountains were being ruined, and she basically tried to get that stopped. She also was in charge of EPA when they decided that carbon dioxide was a harmful pollutant that could kill people. Yet it must be regulated under the statutes of the Clean Air Act. This report that she put together was examined by the Supreme Court, and they agreed with it. She currently works for Apple, and she's the Environment Policy and Social Initiatives VP for Apple. This is Jim Hansen, been mentioned before. Jim, this is getting an award from Rabbi Warren here. And this is Fred Kruger, who is the coordinator for the National Religious Coalition of Creation Care. Jim was the director of NASA's Goddard Institute for about a quarter of a century. He observed in '81 that the levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide would lead to global warming much sooner than people had predicted. So Hansen declared to the US Senate that the effects of climate change in '88 were already being observed. He's a very vocal kind of person, a very interesting kind of person. And he's basically, a lot of people have been trying to hush him up, but he's basically resisted that. And he's basically been even arrested for his activities. This is Bill McKibben. Bill heads up this outfit called 350.org. And he's a professor from New Hampshire. And he organizes meetings and picketing, things like that. He's probably organized more environmental activities like that than anybody on the planet. Here's one that he organized surrounding the White House. This is regarding the Alaska pipeline. And what happened as a result of this activity is that Obama's kids saw the polar bears and the simulated pipeline and so forth, and all the people romping around, and they wanted to know what's going on. And so they had some conversations with Michelle and Barack. And what happened is from then on, Barack paid more attention to climate change. And so before that, his speeches didn't really say much about climate change, whereas afterwards, just about every speech had something in about climate change. So this picketing got to the kids and the kids got to the parents. This is me receiving an award. This is the award that's given out to about 30 people from this group. It's called the Steward of God's Creation Award. I got it because of some of my activities involving founding Solana Beach's Presbyterian Church's Creation Care Team, the Eco Justice Group at Mission San Luis Rey, and the North County Climate Change Alliance. Done some work with the Presbyterian Church on halting mass extinction. I've done a lot of lecturing too, over 100 universities, and have given 8 White House presentations. This is a typical kind of meeting that would go on in Washington. We would have members from our organization. This is one of the White House office rooms. This is in the office of the Environmental Coalition area. And these are a combination of our people and staffers from the White House. So we're basically presenting some ideas to them and trying to influence their thoughts, and they're basically probing us to understand better. These kind of meetings are very, very fruitful. So let's look at some impacts. We'll look at impacts in terms of local things. So this is a symbol here for a small church. Regional things, so we'll do some things like an example in Southern California and some others. And global. So this will be our 3 areas: local, region, and global. This is a Cal DeWitt, who is also a recipient of this award for the stewardship of God's creation. He's presenting a thing to the Presbyterian Church in Solana Beach. It's called the 2001 Environmental Protection Agency Energy Star for Congregation Award. This is something that's given out by EPA to honor various religious organizations who do a good job in terms of the environment. In Solana Beach, what happened is a group was formed there, and they decided as their major project is they would basically change the light bulbs of the facility. There were about 100 incandescent light bulbs. That means those little ones that glow and they're sort of round, and you plug them in and they get kind of dark with age, and also fluorescent. So there was about 100 of these incandescent light bulbs and about 1,000 fluorescent light bulbs changed. And what they did is they got some money to do that, and they took that money and basically spent it. It cost about $6,000 to basically put in the new light bulbs and so forth. And what happened is they got their money back in terms of energy savings in 6 months. So that was been many years ago. So as of now, they've saved roughly around $250,000 just by this activity of simply replacing light bulbs. And for their activity, they got this Energy Star Congregation Award. This is an interesting place. This is Mission San Luis Rey, founded a long time ago, over a couple hundred years ago. Beautiful trees, beautiful grounds. It's called the King of the Missions because it's such a big place and it's so beautiful. Well, in the activities of environmental work there that I and our brother Mark did, one of the things we did is we decided after a few years we would have an Earth Day celebration. We didn't know whether anyone would come or not, but we decided we'd do it anyway. And we ended up with 2,000 people coming. So that made us feel pretty good. We did it again. The second time we got about 4,000 people. So wow, we're on a roll. So then we did it the third time, we got about 6,000 people. So we're really doing well. Then what happened, it's sort of sad, the administration of the mission changed, and the new head person wasn't very interested in environmental things. So we now have no birthday celebrations. So it's kind of sad. So the success or failure of these ventures very much depends on the people that are involved. And so if you get people involved who are interested and passionate and so forth, like I hope most of you are, what happens is you can have great successes. But if the leadership changes significantly, it can basically cause the program to not succeed. This is an example, again, of some regional activities. This is by the so-called Synod of Southern California and Hawaii. The Synod is roughly about 350 churches, and they have roughly 55,000 people in membership. These are 3 different conferences that the Synod has sponsored on the climate crisis at different churches. These are some pictures of the churches. So this is one effective way to get effective speakers like Admiral Herring in here, or like the head of the Presbyterian Church's environmental activities, Rebecca Barnes. We have the Bishop of San Diego in Imperial County. We have the head of Citizens Climate Lobby, the scientist from Scripps Institution of Oceanography, bringing people like that and basically have to learn from them so that you can do better in your environmental programs. This is a policy that was adopted by the Presbyterian Church nationally on preserving biodiversity and halting mass extinction. As I mentioned in the first talk, the current mass extinction is due to 2 things. One is due to climate change, and that's threatening about 25% of the plant and animal species of the planet this century. The second thing is due to the destruction of tropical rainforest. That's threatening another 25%. And so basically, preserving biodiversity and halting mass extinction is crucial to the church. And it goes on to say this is serious stuff. This mass extinction would fundamentally alter and undermine the life and well-being of the human and other creatures that survive. It would rob all future generations of the gifts of wholeness and diversity that God intends. So this is basically says we have to get our act together soon and start doing some things. And we'll talk more about that. This is an example of a success story. A group of people from the Synod of Southern California and Hawaii, and a few others, like some people, some Hollywood stars and some rock band stars, decided we would have an activity on nuclear weapons at the Rose Bowl. The concept that was going on in the country is that if you had 1,000 nuclear weapons, you need 5,000. If you had 5,000, you need 10,000, and so forth and so on. So we ended up with something like about 50,000 nuclear weapons, and the Russians had about the same amount. So many of those were pointed at each other, let's say about 30,000 on each side. So a very dangerous situation. And they were clamoring for getting more nuclear weapons. So we basically had this event. This is a simulation of the event. I don't have any real photos of the event itself, but this occurred in June of 1981. We had stages all over the field, and a lot of singers and stars gave speeches and so forth, and people came and played music, and people had a great time. It was a great event. It led to the concept that we didn't need more nuclear weapons, and pretty soon the freeze became a concept that was accepted around the country. And some of the analysts started to say, well, why don't we drop the number of warheads by 5%? That won't harm anything. Another guy said, no, let's do it 10%. So there was a treaty that was signed by the Russians and the US called the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. And that treaty led to a reduction of very significant numbers. So let's say the numbers were roughly 100,000 warheads. And we got down to about 3,000 or so between the 2 countries. Well, this is an example of some of the people who were involved in the entertainment. Crosby, Still, and Nash. I went to a victory lunch at a Chinese restaurant the next day and met all kinds of people there and had great food. One of the guys came up to me, it was this guy here, and he says, do you know who I am? And I said, sure, because I could see his name tag. It's, Graham, Graham Nash. So I said, you're Graham. And he says, You don't know who I am. I said, well, I can read your name tag. He says, look, I'm going to write my name on this napkin, and I want you to take it home to your kids, because if you show them that you got to have lunch with Graham Nash, you'll be a big hero. So we talk a little bit more, and he sees one of his friends off on the side, and he says, do you know that guy there with the beard and the guitar? I said, no, I don't know him. So he introduces me to Dan Fogelberg. So there I am with my little napkin with the signatures of Graham Nash and Dan Fogelberg going to my kids, and they loved it. So that was a big success. So on the warhead side, this is a graph here to give you some idea of what the warhead situation was like. This is the red, this is the Russian stockpile. So they have a peak here of around 40,000. The US stockpile peaks at around 30-some thousand. If you add the two of them up and add them all up, they're all the rest of the countries of the world down here. China, France, India, Israel, North Korea, Pakistan. You can't see the number of warheads they have because it's lost in the noise level here. So the nuclear warhead problem has been particularly between two countries, Russia and the United States. So what happens with the START Treaty, which started back in February 5th, which is to be ended in February 5th, 2021. That was just last month, supposed to end. Started back in right here. And what happened is we were smart enough under the Biden administration to extend the START Treaty for another 5 years. So fortunately, we have this extension, and neither side will build up its weapons, and hopefully they will actually decrease them. So Dave, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. Question is on the Solano Beach Energy Star project. You mentioned that you had gotten funding for that effort for them to replace all those light bulbs. How did that funding happen? How did you get involved in that?
Well, there was a group of people from Solano Beach that formed a task force, and they basically analyzed what could be done by replacing the small light bulbs and replacing the fluorescent light bulbs and what it would cost. So that was presented to the church, and the church gave a response. This was to a small meeting in the church. This is a wonderful example of Christian work, and you guys are doing marvelous, and it's wonderful that you've done this sort of thing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, except they go on to say that there is no funding for this activity. So therefore, we can't do anything. So what I did is I basically said, well, some of my friends and I have said we would basically fund the activity if you would pay us out of the savings. And this so embarrassed the head cleric there, and he was so disgusted with me that he basically said, "Oh, go ahead, give them the money." So that's how we got the money to fund it. It was kind of a riot. And it led to $5,000 led to, like I say, $250,000 worth of savings. So it really was a brilliant thing for them to do.
Oh, that's amazing, yeah. And then another question locally asked about the Mission San Luis Rey activities. It was doubling every year. How did your activities get started with that whole thing?
Well, these things are examples of wild and woolly, out of the blue kind of starts. What I was doing is the city of San Diego had a annual carrying of the cross ceremony for Good Friday. And one of my friends, he would normally give a talk there, and he couldn't give the talk. And so he says, "Hey, Tom, would you give the talk?" So I said, "Sure, So I go and through this march through San Diego, and I meet up with this Franciscan monk. He's wearing one of these brown robes like they normally do, and we have some great conversations. So we became good friends. And then he says, "Well, come on over. We'll talk about environmental stuff." So we start talking about it, and then we decided, well, let's do something about it. Let's form a group. So we formed a group, and that group held together for about a dozen years. So it was an interesting example of how these things can happen.
All right, and then Marion just has a good question that she put in, which says, how can you respond to someone when they tell you only God can control the weather?
Well, God does a lot of things. He basically sets up a interesting universe, where things are nicely balanced. He sets up a interesting planet, solar system where things are nicely balanced, a nice Earth system where things are nicely balanced. But he has sort of a weird idea that's important to him, and that is the idea of free will. So he basically tries to let us learn some things on our own. And when we learn some things, we often make mistakes. So what happens is we've been making a mistake that's sort of inevitable that I hinted at during our first conversation on environmental perspectives. And that is when you basically invent something clever like a steam engine like Watt did around 1776, and you find out that you need some sort of energy system that's pretty energetic like coal to make this thing work, and how you can reduce a lot of labor by using this machine. So what happened is we started using more and more and more coal. And then as we use more and more coal, we learned that you could also make this thing run maybe even better using things like petroleum. Then we learned you can make it even better if you make things run on natural gas. So we had an economy by then that was based on the concept of using these fossil fuels. And we had no idea that by using this stuff and getting all the benefits that we got from fossil fuels, that we would essentially be poisoning our atmosphere and making the weather system miserable. And ultimately, if we continue in it, making life unfit for us humans on this planet. So it's an idea of, we got a great idea, the steam engine, but basically we didn't learn quick enough in our use of it to regulate it well. And so now we're suffering from that. So that's the reason. And that's not God's fault. That's just basically the fault of us for not being quick on the learning curve.
Becky's asking, why do you think that so many U.S. administrations deny the climate is warming? What are they afraid to address it?
Well, let me do the last one first, because that's the easiest one. Yeah, basically, if your economy is based on fossil fuels, you don't want anyone messing around with the fossil fuels. So if people come, these science types come and they tell you that you're wrecking the planet, the easiest political thing to do, at least in the short run, is to say, you guys are this is a hoax. And you basically don't want to do anything. So if it's a hoax and you don't do anything, you might be able to get away with the politics of it. So I think that's the motivation. I think that some administrations care more for science than others. Now, science doesn't get it right all the time, but it's one of the things that we have that we use for decision making. I mean, if it got it right on cell phones, it got it right on TVs, it got it right on a whole lot of things, So basically, it's tough during times of change. So I think that the society is getting it right in terms of electric vehicles, in terms of power and things like that. But there's always the forces of the guys who made their money in the past saying we want to continue making the money.
Why do you think so many evangelicals have a hard time with the idea of climate change?
Well, it's the same thing that in the other answer is that we got used to the idea of everything is great with fossil fuels, okay? And what happened there is the older evangelicals tended to take that position and to reject anything that would cause any significant changes in the society. The younger kids are going along with climate change, so I think that there's hope with them. But the issue is how do you do the transition where you get the older folks out of power and get the younger folks into power? There's an example of a good example for that is Catherine Hayhoe, who is a evangelical Christian. She is married to a minister, and she teaches meteorology at Texas Tech. And she goes around the world basically convincing people about the ideas that, hey, the climate is a real problem, we have to fix it. And she's very, very successful at her lectures. She made Time Magazine's list of 100 most influential people.
it sounds like there could be a large discussion around that topic.
So let's get on with the Patriarch. This is a example here of, this is the Patriarch with his funny hat. And this is the Pope, who also has a yarmulke on. These guys are good friends, it turns out. Francis came in as a new Pope. He has roughly 1,200 million Catholics, so 1.2 billion Catholics worldwide. And Bartholomew has 300 million Orthodox Christians. So between them, that's what, 1.5 billion people. That's a significant amount of the population of the planet. So having these two guys interested in the climate issue has been very, very helpful for people that are trying to solve it, because they have such a strong representation. The Patriarch Bartholomew got the nickname of the Green Patriarch. Whenever Al Gore heard about his activities, he called him the Green Patriarch, and Bartholomew likes that title. He basically says there's serious stuff going on. For human beings to destroy the biological diversity of God's creation, the plants and the animals, to degrade the integrity of the earth by causing changes in its climate, by stripping the earth of its forests, or destroying its wetlands, to contaminate the earth's waters, its land, its air, and its life. These are sins. And this goes back to that idea of sin in the archery term, where we're basically missing what God would have us do. God doesn't want us to destroy all this stuff. He wants us to basically enjoy it. So what we're doing is we're basically getting God angry because we're not playing ball with his plan. So to commit a crime against the natural world is a sin against ourselves and a sin against God. Whenever Bartholomew said this was sort of new stuff to a lot of the religious community. So it's a very strong statement, and he gets a lot of credit for that. This is a group of us from this National Religious Coalition for Creation Care. We're in Istanbul, Turkey. The year is 2015. We're there to present an award to the Patriarch Bartholomew. So you can see we ate well, nice views. Everyone's having a good time. This is the Sea of Marmara. The place where this award took place was an island. It's about a 2-hour ferry ride from the dock in Istanbul in the Sea of Marmara. And the island was picked by the Patriarch. The day we were giving the award was the feast of the Transfiguration. And so what they did is Patriarch decided that he would have this at the Cathedral of the Transfiguration. So that happened to be on an island about 2 hours away. So that was kind of fun. This is the Hagia Sophia. This was built by the Emperor Constantine's grandkid. In the days whenever Constantine came to this area, he was basically sick of Rome, tired of it there. A lot of the emperors were tired of Rome. They wanted to get out. So he basically moved the whole seat of government to a new place, which he brilliantly called New Rome. So whenever you get a letter from, say, Bartholomew saying something or other, he signs it Bartholomew, Bishop of New Rome, going back to his organization. Has been there for a long time. So a beautiful place. I highly recommend it if you ever get a chance to get there. Food is fabulous. This is me talking to the Bartholomew, and when I was giving my speech, he said, English is a very strange name. And this was like in the first 30 seconds of my speech. So it was like I had to recover on that and decide what to do. So I told a story about where the name came from and so forth, and went on from there. It was interesting that with the name English, you get a lot of comments when you go to various parties. And so I've talked to usually Irish priests in various places like Los Angeles, Boston, Seattle. And these priests have all said to me, Thomas, my son, do you realize that your name, okay, is actually an Irish name? They go back to the same story that I gave the Patriarch. So it must have been good because everyone laughed and it worked well. It's a good icebreaker for the whole meeting. This is the group of us meeting with the Patriarch afterwards. This is the award that we gave him, the Steward of God's Creation Award. And several of us were involved in the actual award giving. And Bartholomew called us, interestingly enough, co-workers in caring for God's creation. That's kind of that makes you feel good. You put your shoulders back. And he awarded the presenters copies of his Congressional Medal of Honor. This is a medal that the U.S. Congress gave him for his activities. Here's a picture of the ones that we got. This is a replica of his Congressional Gold Medal of Honor. Ours is bronze. He's recognized by the Congress as Archbishop of Constantinople, New Rome, and is recognized as the spiritual leader of nearly 300 million Orthodox Christians around the world. So I'm very proud of that medal. Bartholomew is an interesting guy. Early in his activities, he decided to make the environment a major issue. And so he organized a movement called Religion, Science, and the Environment. And what he did as part of this movement is he got people from various places in the world to come to symposia. He had one about the book of Revelation and the environment, a crisis in the Black Sea a couple of years later, the river of life down the Danube to the Black Sea, the Adriatic Sea at risk, the Baltic Sea, a common heritage, the Amazon as a source of life, restoring balance, the Mississippi River, global responsibilities and environmental sustainability. And then he had one that's called Toward a Greener Attica. Attica is basically greater Athens and all the islands in that area. So he organized all this stuff. And I'll tell you a little bit about this conference here at the Greater Attica. This provides an opportunity to get people from all over the planet together and have them fed by the various speakers, but also there's enough time where you can interact and learn about each other and make some new friends. So it's a very, very energizing kind of activity. This is Bartholomew kicking things off towards a green Attica, preserving the planet and protecting its people. These are the kind of costumes that he wears. See a lot of people with funny hats here. These are some of the people who were at the conference, a good representation of women. This is the Archbishop of Canterbury. This is a guy who is a very leading Jewish rabbi. I got to meet him wandering around the island. It turns out the island has a lot of streets, as you would expect, and however, the streets don't have any street signs. And so you don't know which street you're on. So he and his wife and me and my wife are wandering around there trying to find the next building. So we got to know each other and so forth. A lot of fun. So you get to really know people there. This is the second cardinal. The Pope sent 2 cardinals to this meeting. So this is a really important meeting for the Pope. And this one's called Cardinal Turkson. For example, after our dinner one evening, he and I went for a walk for about 15 minutes to discuss the issues of where does the Pope and his advisors stand on the issue of survivability of humans. Pretty heavy issue. And he basically says, well, we understand the problem. Well, by the way, when you speak to him, he's a Black guy from Ghana. He speaks English better than I do, much clearer. So very fascinating guy to talk to, very, very bright, very quick. He basically says that, so we're well aware of the issue. What we're disagreeing on is the timing. Some of them are not so sure that everything is going to be occurring in this century. Some are thinking it's going to take longer. But a lot of them are basically sure that the problems are basically this century and that we need to act very quickly. And we'll get to some more on that a little bit later. This is what the place where we had the meeting was the museum. It's called the Acropolis Museum because it's right at the foot of the Acropolis. This is the Parthenon sitting on the top here. And at night, what they do is they have these are like illuminated, not statues, but these are like screens that are lit up of various women surrounding this beautiful facility. It was not uncommon for them to have statues of women around the various temples and so forth. So this is a mark of that. It's a beautiful museum. It was built because people would say to them that the artifacts that were stolen from them couldn't be returned to Athens because it wasn't a fit place to put them in Athens. So what happened is they built this fit museum. It's a beautiful museum. And so a lot of the artifacts are starting to be returned to Athens. This is a picture I took from our dining room of the Parthenon in the evening. Lovely place. You can see this is nice. So you have a nice place, good food, plenty of time for people to talk. So you can make some good friends there, and those friendships last. This is Bartholomew visiting various places. Some of the islands that we visited as part of this activity, this conference, Bartholomew and his predecessors had never been there. So this is the first patriarch to visit there. So it was like a really big deal. So basically, Bartholomew, it was a big deal for him coming to these islands because the patriarch had never been there before. So this place here, this is a church here. The church bells rang there for about a half an hour, celebrating him coming there. It was a very, very big deal. And these are some of the places. It wasn't all work. We ate here at this hotel place, very nice. We had maybe over 200 people taking part in the activity. This is a dance that was organized by some of the locals. So it really was a good sort of thing, not all work. Okay, finally, the last part is the Pope. So this is the Pope Francis. This is him in front of a stained glass window there in St. Peter's. It's a beautiful window. He wrote a book called Laudato Si, and I'll tell you more about that. This is Laudato Si is the first two words of the book in Latin. It says praise to you. And the subtitle of the book is On the Care for the Common Home. So what happened is he became Pope. Soon thereafter, he made a visit to Bartholomew. And Bartholomew talked to him a lot about environmental things and very much influenced his view of environmental things. In fact, in the book, Laudato Si, out of the first 10 sections of the book, 3 sections are devoted to the Pope praising Bartholomew. So it's kind of interesting to see 2 religious leaders, sort of competing religions, with the one praising the other leader in this most important book. So he wrote a letter to Bartholomew on his International Ecological Symposium, the one in Athens in the islands, basically praising it and saying that that we may be condemning future generations to a common home left in ruins. So he's well aware of the issues. What kind of world do we want to leave to those who come after us, the children who are now growing up? So we have a serious issue. We better fix it up. So he basically continues his letter, and he basically says, I am in complete favor of what you're doing. So he goes on to say, safeguard creation, because if we destroy creation, creation will destroy us. So if you talk to your friends, I think this is a good line to remember, that if you foul your nest, if you make it impossible for you to live in a given area, what will happen is you'll have to leave that area. And if that area happens to be the whole planet, you essentially make it impossible for humanity to live. So I think this is a really profound comment. This is an interesting comment here. This is the Pope meeting. This guy here is, I'll tell you a little bit more about him later. His name is Ramanathan. He's from Scripps Institution of Oceanography at the University of California, San Diego. And this is a meeting where this Ramanathan brought a group of about a dozen people from Scripps and some other academic institutions to Rome to meet with the Pope to discuss climate change. So what happened is they happened to be walking along the parking lot, and all of a sudden this funny looking small car comes by, and this guy in a white outfit gets out of the car. Turns out it's the Pope. And this guy here says to him, well, do you want to talk to the Pope now? And Rom goes for it. So basically he gives his parking lot speech to the Pope, and apparently it went over well. So this is the famous meeting. Usually they meet, and you'd expect to meet in sort of a tapestry-filled room with all sorts of gold stuff all over the place. So here they are meeting in the parking lot. Now, Rom says that there are 2 things wrong with this picture. And you wonder, what's that? And his comment is basically, well, there are 2 Hindus. He's a Hindu. This guy's a Hindu giving advice to the Pope. So he thought it was pretty good. So the Pope is basically open to information from from all sources, including the two Hindus in the parking lot. So there's a group that Rom belongs to. It's called the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. It was founded in 1604. Galileo was made a member of that a few years later. It consists of 80 academicians appointed for life. Rom got his invitation from a pope, actually 3 popes before Pope Francis, Pope John Paul II. He was flying around the world somewhere, getting ready to come back to California, catch his next plane out, and he gets this email that supposedly is from the Pope. And he says, "What in the world is this? Why am I getting an email from the Pope?" So he decides to look at it and looks at it, and the Pope is inviting him to come to Rome for a private meeting. So he figures, well, I don't know what this is all about, but I'll do it. And so he goes, and the Pope asks him what he would like to be appointed to be one of these 80 academicians in this Pope's group. These people were chosen from the world's most eminent mathematical and experimental scientists. They're chosen without any form of ethnic or religious discrimination from all countries. Rom is a Hindu. They're also atheists. So it doesn't matter whether you're a religious believer or not. They want you there for your skills. There are currently 36 countries are represented in this 80 people here. And Ramanathan, people always call him Rom, is both a member of this group and also he's also been promoted to the chief science advisor to the Pope. The people in this Pontifical Academy meet in these grounds here. This is St. Peter's in the background. This is one of the 4 or 5 buildings that they have for the Pontifical Academy. This is a central courtyard that they have where they can meet together. This is Bernie Sanders giving a talk there. This is what a typical meeting looks like. Here you have a variety of people. Their conference, and this one is called Protect the Earth and Dignify Humanity. This is a big issue with Francis. He says that it just isn't a techie problem. If we solve the techie problem without solving our social problems, we're not going to succeed. So that's an important thing to remember. This is his book on the common care for the earth by Francis. And then it comments, each year sees the disappearance of thousands of plant and animal species, which we will never know, which our children will never see because they've been lost forever. This is the COP21 conference in Paris. And basically this came out after the publication of Laudato Si. And Laudato Si was a unifying factor behind the conference. So even though this is the 21st conference from the first Kyoto conference of the UN, what happened is they have a tough time agreeing on anything. So anyway, largely because of this Laudato Si publication, they ended up in agreement. 195 nations signed that agreement. So this was a wonderful thing. This is a cartoon from the San Diego Union Tribune where the earth is happy for that and saying, mercy, thanks. Here's a little cartoon about all the pollution. And these 2 guys are discussing pollution. Climate change is killing the planet, right? And the other guy says, is the Pope Catholic? So this is a good answer. This is Francis addressing a UN plenary meeting on climate change. So he's there with all the major leaders of the world in the UN and discussing climate change. And it apparently had a big impact on them. During the meeting that I attended in Athens, a couple of the people, Cardinal Turkson and an economist who some of you may know, Jeffrey Sachs, were called to leave the meeting after their presentations and to fly to Rome because the Pope had called a meeting of oil execs from all over the world. And it was a big meeting. And he basically says that energy must not destroy civilization, that we basically need to figure out how to do energy and keep civilization. So he says, there's no time to lose. He says, you guys have done a good job on many things. You're getting more careful in assessing the risk and so forth, but your actions aren't soon enough. Will we turn the corner in time? Because no one can answer that with certainty. But each month that passes, the challenge of energy transition becomes more pressing. So anyway, to help in this, there's a guy, and I'll talk to you a little bit about. He's Professor V. Rob Nod Ron Ramanathan. Now, with a name like that, Everybody calls him Rom. So we'll refer to him as Rom. This is Rom giving a speech at a local activity here. He does a lot of local speaking, and particularly in the churches. Rom is a distinguished professor of atmospheric and climate sciences. He was called by Janet Neapolo, the chancellor of the whole UC system, to become chair of a group they have there called Bending the Curve. How do we basically get off this curve that we're on now and bait it as this climate curve and bend it into something that makes sense? So they put together this climate change solution education project for the entire University of California system. I was one of the recipients of one of the prototype courses before that. He's a member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, been for a long time. Also, he's a member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. He made the comment that the Pontifical Academy is by far the most effective academy that he has ever been involved with. So he's received numerous awards. He's made a comment that the effect of greenhouse gases on global warming is the most important environmental issue facing the world today. So he's really in it. He thinks it's very serious. This is an example of one of the speeches he gave at Cambridge University at a place called the Center for the Study of Existential Risk. There are roughly 100 people associated with that center. So this idea of existential risk is a big thing. It's the idea that the risks that are facing us from things like climate change are so threatening that they could easily destroy our whole civilization. Not just destroy a country, but destroy the whole global civilization. His talk was called Climate Change, Morphing into an Existential Threat. So he's an interesting guy. He has a small car, small electric car that is a two-seater. He drives around in that. He works with the local people when he can. This is the local bishop of San Diego and Imperial County. He's conducting a lecture series there, and he's having a ROM as part of that. He basically talked during his section, McElroy, of putting together a 181 kilowatt electrical system. This system saves the parishes about $25,000 per year. And it didn't cost anything the way they financed it. They did a bigger system. They generated some extra electricity and paid for the whole system by means of the electricity. So it's really a win-win kind of thing for the parishes. And in 3 years, he planned to have 99 churches have similar solar systems in these two counties. He's about halfway there now. So big progress. So there we go. Let's get to the conclusions here. So we are basically in a situation where we're threatened by our own actions. It's sort of like we've decided not to pay attention to the wisdom of the past, and basically we're going our own way, and we're not solving the problem quickly enough. So we're sort of like in the Garden of Eden Part 2 situation. We have to decide which way we're going to go. We can go the way of fixing the problem or go the way of trying to avoid the problem. So if we go the way of avoiding the problem, we just end up destroying our civilization. If we fix it, we end up with a wonderful situation, and we save a heck of a lot of money. The drawdown estimates we did earlier, where we save about $74 trillion. So the world is in your hands, and we have to do something with it. Let's do something sensible. There's drawdown again, showing us that we can win the war on climate change and save about $74 trillion. So let's do it. This is an interesting thing by Sheikh Yamani. Sheikh Yamani was the ambassador from Saudi Arabia to the US for around a couple dozen years. He comments here that the Stone Age will not end for lack of stone. And the oil age will end long before the world runs out of oil. So basically, the limitations that we're going to see are basically due to us. So in conclusion, this is Charlton Heston posing as Moses here in the Ten Commandments, parting the Red Sea. And there's a great saying associated with Moses. That is, see, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. This day I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you, that I have sent before you life and death, blessing and curses. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live. So that's the thing we have to do, folks. We have to choose life. So I'll close on a little story here. This is a replica of the earth here. And just imagine we have a guy, let's say in the Midwest, and he hears that there's going to be a problem of flooding in his area. So he basically does what most guys would do, and that's ignores the problem. So pretty soon, the sheriff is driving his car up and down with a bullhorn saying, get out of here immediately, the floods are coming. And the guy ignores the problem, says, I'm just going to tough it out, no problem at all. So pretty soon the floods come and the street becomes a river. And the Coast Guard cutter is now going down the street and saying, hop on board, get out of here, because save your lives before it's too late. No, I'm just going to tough it out, no problem at all. So pretty soon the waters are higher and higher, and he's standing on the roof, hanging on the chimney, and the helicopter is overhead, dropping a rope ladder down for him to hang on to. And he says, no, thanks, it's just going to go away, it'll be fine. So what happens is the story continues. He basically drowns, and he's now at the pearly gates. And what happens there is that he's trying to argue with the gatekeeper about getting into the pearly gates. And so his argument goes, I've done all these good things. I've been a wonderful person. I've been really working hard at all these things, but I don't understand why God has abandoned me in my moment of need. So all of a sudden, this clouds start to cloud up and lightning comes from above. And a voice comes down and says, abandon you? What do you mean abandon you? I sent you a radio broadcast. I sent you a sheriff. I sent you a Coast Guard cutter. I sent you a chopper. What's it take to get your attention? Well, folks, I hope that I've gotten your attention. So thank you very much. Any more Q&A?
Tom, that was excellent. Again, thank you so much for giving us a better understanding of the impact of all these important organizations that are all working together, acknowledging the problem and working together to help create the kind of pressure on the powers that be that are going to enable some kind of change. I mean, this just doesn't happen without that. So it's really important. And to that point, so Sarah is asking, what do you think is needed to move Congress to definitively act on climate?
Well, what they need to do is to essentially start to think of what is their role in life. And it's more of a moral question than a question that they tend to ask. I think the question that they tend to ask is the question of how do I win the next election? And some of them are betting on the idea that you can win the next election by simply ducking. So if you duck the issues and you basically ignore the climate issue, that somehow or other you'll have enough of a base that will carry you through. So I think that's the basic thrust. And so what you have to do is to somehow convince those that aren't going to be convinced on a moral issue, on a moral basis or ethical basis, that it's not going to work that way. That there are enough people who will vote against you if you don't solve these problems. So if you want to get reelected, you better get reelected on a platform of you are active in solving the problems.
I have been so encouraged by what I read, and now I can't even remember if it was Tuesday or Wednesday. I think it was all the way back to Tuesday. In the LA Times business page, an article by Sammy Roth on the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and how they are really beginning to realize that they can help do something about people switching to more electrical energy. It was the most encouraging thing I had read in a long time. And I have, just because of my drawdown experience in the month of February, I have Asma to join the Pasadena League of Women Voters Natural Resources Committee. They are people who are gung-ho to do something about getting the city of Pasadena and any of the other 12 cities that are associated with the Pasadena Area League of Women Voters involved in working at the local level. And I'm saying this in response to the last question about Congress and the answer that you gave. I really do feel that we are going to be most successful by acting locally. At one time, there was this phrase, think globally, but act locally. And I think it all boils down eventually to the economics of it. And when people discover how much they can save by going with electricity instead of fossil fuels, that will be the turning point. And I'm beginning to see it happening on a local basis. If something that has been so committed to fossil fuels like the Department of Water and Power in Los Angeles can begin to turn around, that is hopeful.
Well, yeah, that's a big step. They built a very interesting power plant. I guess it was about 2 years ago. They let a contract on it. It's a solar photovoltaic power plant, and it features energy storage, so you can do the electricity at night for about 4 hours of energy storage. And the interesting thing for them, it was significantly cheaper than them trying to do the same thing with natural gas. So it's much, much cheaper than coal or nuke or whatever.
It will take the combination of solar power, wind power for nighttime, and good battery storage. I think we've got enough smart people who can begin to put all of this together.
I agree completely. And the hope is that not for the next lecture, but for the lecture after that, we're going to have a discussion of just that issue focused on the Texas grid.
Tom, and by the way, Becky posted in the chat the article, I think, Carolyn, that you're referring to from the LA Times. Thank you, Becky, for doing that. Just to refresh on the 8th of the 8-week sessions, which is next week. Tom, you just want to give us a little preview, and then you mentioned this sort of optional follow-on on the nuclear discussion. So just give us a quick preview on those two sessions.
Sure. Well, let's start with the last one first. That basically does the thing that Carolyn just talked about. You know, it basically shows that the sun doesn't shine all the time. So at night you have a problem. It recognizes that some storage is helpful, but it's expensive. Then you go ahead and you include one part of a wind grid. What that does is that basically gives you something at night. So that makes your problem easier. So if you then put another part of a wind grid in, that makes your problem even easier yet. So that's the thrust of it. That basically some combination of, as Carolyn said, you know, photovoltaics, wind, and storage, but also using the grid in a way. You wouldn't see this by just looking at the individual properties. So if you look at the properties, then combine them with the grid, you then see how they all play together as a system. So that's the basic concept of that. Now, the talk before that is one that I think I'm fascinated by. It's that basically we've been through all this COVID agony, and we have this big problem of climate change coming up. Have we learned anything from our agony in COVID that can be applicable to the climate stuff? And the thrust of the talk is going to be, yes, we've learned a lot. And so we'll go over just how the COVID thing worked and what you could predict with it and what we did right, what we did wrong, and how we can now apply that to the issues of climate. So those are the next two.
Okay, excellent. Any other questions or comments from folks?
Possibly a group that's not being motivated and has not a strong financial benefit are the people who are living in poverty right now and yet could contribute to making changes. But how do you give those people an incentive to do something?
That's a good idea.
They need an incentive that they understand.
Different organizations have tried different things. One of the ones I'm familiar with is in Utah. they came up with a plan for the homeless, which essentially was they were providing them not with just living, but with a house. So a house to live in, and they have to take care of the house, but they also have to do some functions for the city in order to pay for their rent.
That's a good one.
So combining the house with work is something that gives them a sense of social value. What they find is that people feel very good about themselves. The program is working really well, and they're expanding it.
By the way, just on the homelessness issue, one very interesting statistic that I heard from the folks in Orange County, where I'm at, that deal with homelessness, is that it costs the county of Orange $100,000 roughly per year per person that's homeless on the street. And if they have housing, now all of a sudden the cost is $50,000. So there's a savings of $50,000 just to get homeless folks in housing initially, housing first. And then you start working on the triage of issues, whether it's mental illness, addiction issues, or just simply job training as the main three things. And so it's a fascinating topic, and why it's so important that politically, in terms of being active locally, we try to get our city councils to step up to their requirements to provide affordable housing for the homeless population in our areas. Thank you all very much for attending and for your interest and support of this hugely important topic. And Tom, thanks again for such a wonderful presentation.
Well, thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you next week.